let's officially get started. So, we're back at my residence, Miguel's crib, and talking about social engineering. Now, what is social engineering? As it says here, the human side of cybersecurity. So if you think about it, we're the conduit for the most cybersecurity breaches, right? It's a lot of the breaches are based off of human error. It's based off of manipulation from time to time. Okay. Now, so imagine someone comes to your house and they're like, they have the vest on, you know, the reflective vest, like they're ready to work on some stuff. And they're like, I'm here to fix your pipes or something, right? And you're like, oh, nobody called me about fixing some pipes, but or they need to check your meter. So you let them inside unknowingly. Next thing you know, they walk out with your valuables. Okay, that's an example of social engineering. But it's not just human-based. There's a technical component too, as well. If that makes sense. And we're going to talk about all those things shortly. All right. So, pretexting. What is pretexting? Essentially, pretexting is like the example that I gave. It's when they come to your home or wherever it is, your place of work, right? And they have an excuse to be there. And we'll talk about different ways to circumvent that, to understand how you can prevent that, or at least how to mitigate that, so you can understand what to do in that situation when you're not sure, right? And also something that these people do, these social engineers, they play with your emotions, right? In terms of the average person, we don't essentially call it social engineering, right? We call it probably a finesser or a scammer, right? Something like that. But it's all one and the same, okay? A lot of skills are applicable to that as well. All right, so they play with your emotions. What does that really mean, right? So when we talk about being vulnerable, there's the human vulnerability aspect. So if you take a look over, well, when you're ready, let me know if I need to slow down too, okay? I see you're writing. So we have the human vulnerabilities, right? It's like humans, like we're walking software or something, we have vulnerabilities. So people tend to appeal to authority. Like I say, if you see a guy, maybe he comes to your door and he has that vest on, like he looks like he knows what he's talking about. Maybe he has a clipboard and some tools on his side, right? Okay, appealing to authority. Or maybe it's someone, he's showing up to your front door with a suit and a tie on, right? Or to your place of work. And he's like, I'm so-and-so, I'm here to meet with the CEO, right? And he has a suit and tie on, all official, in a briefcase. Oh, he looks very, very trustworthy, right? So, authority. And we'll talk about how to circumvent these. A lot of the same things you'll use for all these vulnerabilities, you'll use a lot of the same methods, okay? But we'll talk about how to stop it shortly. So they appeal to urgency. Oh, well, obviously you need to do this now, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't do it, then there's going to be consequences because it's so urgent. So you want to look at, well, and we'll talk about, you know, it's sort of internal as well as external feelings you want to sort of manage. And I'll explain that shortly. They want to intimidate you, right? Like I said, consequences, intimidating, maybe physically intimidating as well. Okay, could be potentially. They work from a perspective that's called consensus-based, right? So it's like everyone's doing X, Y, or Z, or maybe they work with someone that you know, or they say it's loosely associated, right? And they're like, oh, well, everyone's doing it, right? Impersonation. That's essentially, like I mentioned, the guy ready to fix your pipes or whatever he needs to fix, right? Scarcity, right? You know, maybe there's not enough, so you need to act now or something of that nature. So there's a short amount of time period, or, you know, there's not enough of this item, so you got to get it before it's gone. Does that make sense? Right? To get you to sign up for something, the next thing you know, they're collecting your information, for example, right? And all of these sort of authority, especially, kind of associate with trust. Trust, not just from like a human perspective, like you and I, like I'm giving this lecture to you, right? Mm-hmm. But from a trust perspective, we're talking about business trust. So somehow they've crafted an online identity for which they seem trustworthy. Maybe their site seems fairly legitimate, right? Or it's a brand that seems somewhat trustworthy, right? But you don't really know. So it's good to have second opinions, you know, Yelp, that sort of deal, you know? So there's the other component, right? Human reactions, right? When we navigate our world, sometimes things happen. We emotionally get involved from, various different perspectives, and we just react and we don't think clearly because we're human, right? So, and then one of the other components is misinformation, right? Which everyone's been talking about for a long time, and disinformation. So this is sort of like a global perspective, right? Not just the average person, but I think it's important for us to talk about. And that's also included in the Security Plus Chapter 4. So the difference between misinformation and disinformation is the intention. So misinformation is when are you guys familiar with that?
No, I was gonna ask.
Okay, yeah. So misinformation is essentially when someone puts something out, maybe it's an article or a video, but they don't intentionally misinform, right? It's like when something crazy happens in the news and reporters are just quick to get it out and not necessarily verify all the information, whether it's accurate.
In Boston, Massachusetts, whatever, in Baltimore was a terrorist attack.
Yeah, and it's like, first of all,
the bridge that fell down.
Yeah, people don't necessarily know that as a fact, but of course people are speculating. Misinformation, right? What is your evidence? And disinformation, where you're intentionally putting stuff out there, to have like a global, large scale impact with the population, to get people to change their identities, their minds, right, etc.
So the difference is that disinformation is intentional?
Right, misinformation is unintentional. Yeah. Online influence campaigns is sort of what we're getting at when we're talking about especially disinformation. Some of the ways that you can combat that is just view things. It's kind of, right, this day and age, it's kind of difficult to view things from, a perspective that's not everyone else's perspective, right? Because as humans, we sort of bounce off of other people and what other people think. But it's important to just take a moment and be like, well, how did I craft this view? Where did this come from? Why do I feel this way, right? So we can try to combat some online influence campaigns, because people are actively trying to manipulate how we feel, like how we operate in the world. You can think about it, because you know about politics and shit, like I do. We have a lot of things, COINTELPRO, we have all these campaigns with regard to, just, you know what I mean, all these things, trying to influence us, especially people that have a hue like you and me. You know what I mean? So, and then let's talk about some technical vulnerabilities. So we talked about the human aspect, but it's important to talk about, technical vulnerabilities. Like when we're talking about credentials, essentially it's basically like when you log into something, username, password, or whatever, anything that you use to identify yourself. And we can talk about encryption, which whenever you're online, you should have that little lock, right? It should say that it's secured, so to speak. So if you go to a website and it says this connection is unsecured, it's a pretty good indication that some stuff that's not very cool is going on. Does that make sense? Have you experienced that, Griselda?
A few times.
Right. That's one of the indications, right? Any one of these things isn't necessarily the end all be all with regard to determining if you're being engineered, right? Socially engineered, or if they're trying to take advantage of you. But as you put the details together, you begin to understand maybe this business or whatever is not legitimate, right? Or as legitimate as they claim to be. So we talk about valid encryption. Make sure your site is secured if they claim it is. Site errors, like I said, not secure, can't continue, or any messages that says some error indication, right? Punctuation, which is a clear indicator oftentimes, one of the first things I tend to look at. That's important because a lot of these people who scam aren't necessarily from like natural speakers, natural born speakers. So it's not just alone. It could be very, very well that maybe they're just English isn't their first language or something, right? But as you move forward, you begin to understand when you put all these things together, maybe there's something going on here that's not so good. Inconsistent communication, right? Maybe they're just inconsistent, like the time that they respond, that sort of deal. So you get the feeling that something bad's going on. So you want to investigate that further. Now, with the other technical vulnerabilities, we have things that are called like phishing. Now, this is more like technical from our perspective, but it's good for you to know as well. We got phishing. When someone sends you an email and they claim they're somebody and they're not, right? Basically, or they're trying to get you to do something or give them some information based off of their claims, okay? Vishing, the phone version, someone calls you, right? Typo squatting. This is interesting because you may have experienced something of that nature. So sometimes businesses can have one domain address, like google.com, and essentially what they do, they change their domain address. So it might be google1.com or ww3ws.com, you know what I'm saying, or something. So that's called typo squatting. So that's why it's good to understand, the URL that you visit. If something doesn't look right, maybe that's not quite legitimate, Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, so then we have smishing, which is kind of a funny name, but basically SMS, phishing. Because people oftentimes, I don't know if you receive these messages, it'll be like, Capital One, or, some other bank. It's like, first of all, I don't even have that bank. And second, how'd you get my number? But all you really have to do is just don't respond to it if it's not applicable to you.
I got an email the other day. It was like,
Yeah.
thank you for your order of an iPhone 15. And I'm like, and it was like a PayPal, and I noticed the email associated with the PayPal was my Gmail, right? And
Right.
it's like, that's not the email I use with my PayPal, so it's like, what is this?
Right.
And it's like, if this is an error, please call us that. You know what I mean?
Right. Then you call them, which is another thing. You never want to call based off the information that they give you, but the one that you look up yourself, which is pretty important. Just like the guy, if he shows up to your door, don't call the number he gives you, right? Yeah. Call the number that you just called. All right. So we talked about that, typo squatting, smishing. Let's talk about some prevention methods, right? So prevention method number 1, you've accomplished because you're already here, right? You're receiving training. So congratulations, right? And policies. From a business perspective, it's good to have policies that are set in place that say, this is what we use our technology for, our email, for example. So if you're working at a business, then maybe you don't want to receive emails that talk about gift cards because you signed up for something and you used your business email, right? So you want to have policies that are enforced to only tell your employees to use your emails or your infrastructure for specific use cases, okay? Only business processes. So in terms of passwords, we can talk about different attacks, like rainbow tables and that sort of thing, but that's more like a technical jargon, right? We can talk about brute force attacks where people keep trying, different methods or combinations of words and letters, right, etc., in order to unlock your stuff. But the way to prevent that primarily is, number 1, have a good, decent password. That's complex. Number 2 is 2-factor authentication. Y'all familiar? I know you're familiar with that, right? Are you familiar with that?
So it's like a password and a PIN?
It could be a password and a PIN, but even better is a different communication channel, like a secondary channel. Because you have your password and username typically, but a secondary communication channel could be like you use your phone for text. You receive a text when you log in. Yeah, most services will allow you to do that. So you want to enable that everywhere that you can, because eventually someone's going to crack your password. Because we have all these high-powered computers, people just can crack passwords all day with some services, right? So that's called 2-factor authentication. That's 2FA. All right, and with regard to social engineering, going back to that, I would say there's a couple of things. From a perspective, if a guy's right in front of you, talking to you, or you're over the phone, and you have to make a decision and react immediately, take a breather. Take a moment and think about it. Because nothing typically is that urgent, right? Even if someone calls you talking about, my name is Miguel, I'm locked up, I need some bail money, right? Maybe it sounds just like me, maybe it's AI, right?
It's the AI voice stuff.
Yeah. Right. So you just take a breather, right? And just maybe you can hang up and call him back, right?
Sure, that actually did happen to me because someone hit me on Instagram was like, hey, I'm locked up, I need some money.
Right.
And then I hit up the dude, he was like, nah, that wasn't me. And I was like,
Right.
I mean, I didn't see anything, but it was like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's crazy,
You
right?
did that though.
Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, take a moment and think and just don't react. With regard to the technical aspect, something that typically happens is that they send you links. So you want to think about what you're clicking before you click. even we're talking about what's popular is messaging on social media platforms, right? And they'll send you links and stuff. And like my cousin sent me something the other day. I'm like, I don't know what this is. I'm like, what is this? He didn't respond. I'm like, okay, someone probably hacked him. They're sending other links to other people so they can hack them, right? So just think before you click. And then having a password tracker, that's really good. It helps you manage your passwords, which is really good. So you're not using the same password, hopefully. Well, a lot of people
password
are.
tracker do you recommend?
I have, what is it called? Actually, within Google, by default, they have one now.
Okay.
Like you have Chrome on your phone.
You trust Google?
I trust them enough because they pretty much run the world and they've done a good job with security I've seen. Well, as long as you configure your Google services properly, but specifically just with the password tracker, yeah.
That they collect on you and sell to advertisers.
Well, yeah, that's data. It's a different perspective, right? I feel like it's good to talk about that. But to be honest, if you want to go that route of not giving any data, there's a couple of different processes you have to do. It's a balance between having people have your data or keeping your data private versus usability. And I feel like it's a balance we need to reach someday soon. And so we can sort of take back, controlling our own data. But that's probably a different class. All right, and let's see. That's about it. So we talked about, just to recap, what is social engineering? Go.
The human part of the online.
Yeah, cybersecurity, yeah. Basically, yeah. Virtually another way to say it is how not to get scammed, right? Or how not to get played with, right? And we talked about pretexting, someone having an excuse not to be there, playing with your emotions. We talked about, most importantly, training policies, two-factor authentication. Don't react, take a breather before you act. Think before you click. Get yourself a password tracker. And yeah, we talked about the human vulnerabilities and some things you expect that they use on you. Yeah, and we talked about some other vulnerabilities that are technical. And that's it. Thank you very much. That was kind of nice and easy. I wonder how long was that?
Pretty good.
That was almost 20 minutes.